Welcome to EdPsych 501, Screencast 6, Part 2, Mixed Methods. In this brief screencast, I'll be quickly going through Johnson and Christensen's description of mixed methods, and then I'll supplement that with Cresswell and Plano-Clark's description. These two researchers are preeminent scholars in mixed methods, and if you are looking at employing mixed methods in your research, they would be who I'd recommend to go to get more detailed information about how to conduct mixed methods. So mixed methods is a research approach that involves the mixing of quantitative and qualitative methods. And we do it because we come to a point where we feel that one method in and of itself will not answer our research question adequately. And so some examples of when this might happen would be when quantitative research is missing out on the phenomena because it's too focused on hypothesis or theory testing. Similarly, quantitative results may be too abstract to be useful in practical applications. So you might want to supplement your quantitative analysis with qualitative findings in order to add depth and to make them more applicable and more generalizable. On the other side of the coin, qualitative research doesn't lend itself to making predictions very well. It can help to build theories, but in order to be able to actually say, this is what I expect to have happen based on empirical findings, that's not its primary purpose. And so you may want to take what you've built as a theory and subject it to some empirical testing in order to make some actual predictions about how the world works. Qualitative methods are sometimes criticized for having small sample sizes, which make it have an appearance of being less credible, and so you can supplement your research with quantitative methods to add some, maybe some credibility or some generalizability to what you're studying. Also, qualitative research can be interpreted as being biased because so much of it is dependent on researchers' interpretations, and so again, to sort of add some credence to what's being presented, quantitative may be something that could be added. But to be honest, those aren't real. They're not valid criticisms of qualitative methods other than to sort of please the stakeholders. And I would argue that as long as you are answering your research questions, then you shouldn't just supplement your methodology with the alternative type just to satisfy stakeholders. I think that if you concisely explain the rationale for why you're focused on this type of methodology, and then also clarify how your results can be used to practically answer the question, then you shouldn't need to use a mixed methods approach just to satisfy stakeholders. Anyways, that's a bit of a tangent, but the idea being that quantitative and qualitative methods can be very complementary to each other and add depth and add a level of rigor that you wouldn't get with one method on its own. So then Johnson and Christensen lay out these steps of mixed methods research. I'm not going to go through them in much depth here, but I would like to add to this and sort of highlight the questions that you might ask as you're working through these. So in terms of step number 2, determining a rationale for using a mixed design, the rationales that may justify mixed methods are things like we need to triangulate our results with multiple sources or multiple ways of analyzing our data. Or we may want to be complementary to our findings in one methodology versus another. Another reason would be that we want to go through some kind of developmental process where we build a theory and then test it, or test a theory and then add depth to our understanding of the theory, maybe expand upon the theory with qualitative inquiry. And then finally, there's this idea of expanding, and so taking a theory and then adding to it maybe through qualitative inquiry and then going ahead and testing it with a quantitative study. So when you're going through these steps, you're going to be asking yourself which method should take priority over the other, whether or not I should be doing a simultaneous data collection or sequential. And then you're going to be faced with this writing style problem, and this is the situation where when you write in a quantitative way, it's definitely different than when you write in a qualitative way. And so how do you merge those two styles of writing? It can be very challenging. There's also this problem of an imbalance of expertise. So we may be very strong in one area versus the other, And so how do we bring balance and ensure that the rigor and the quality of the methods are as strong on either side, the quantitative and qualitative sides? Then there's the issue of length, and so as you're working through these steps, it can very easily become a very large research project when you're doing mixed methods, and that can make it less and less feasible. So it's hard to put boundaries on what's possible to be done, but it's about being very specific in terms of the extent to which you're trying to answer your questions, and limiting yourself to what needs to be done as opposed to doing everything that you can. And then the perennial problem with mixed methods at this point in its development as a research methodology is the need to overcome critics who believe that these two methodologies cannot coexist. And the reasons for that are very rooted in the paradigms that give rise to the methods, and that when you dig deep into why we would take a quantitative versus a qualitative approach to research, the underpinnings and the paradigms, the worldviews, they don't really mingle very well together. They don't really align well. And so if those don't align well, then how can you use these methods to do research practically? And so that's a bit of an esoteric argument for against mixed methods. And so I think myself and Charlotte, we take a more pragmatic approach, and most researchers are moving towards this idea that if the research question necessitates it, then it's a valid methodology. So they also present this quadrant type figure that shows the 9 different designs. And this isn't something that everyone would agree with, but I think it makes sense. It gives you a framework to think about how mixed methods can be designed. And so they've got this time order decision that you have to make. Is it happening concurrently at the same time or sequentially? And then this emphasis decision. So which methodology is taking the dominant status versus maybe potentially an equal status. And so you can see they've got all the different combinations here, qualitative and quantitative with equal status happening at the same time, and then the 2 versions of sequential with, again, an equal status framework. The dominant status version, well, there's different combinations depending on which one is dominant versus sort of secondary, and we see that there are ultimately 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 versions of this, and so each combination of status, and then also the different sequencing that can play out. So according to Johnson and Christensen, there are strengths and limitations to mixed methods. The limitations are that it requires more time, requires a dual expertise. Combining results can be very problematic and maybe even lead to contradictions. I don't think that's actually much of a limitation, other than it gets challenging to write them up. But that can be a very interesting finding in and of itself. This idea that something would contradict itself when studied in a different methodology. And then there is very little known about the merits of these 9 designs that they talk about. It's a very new way of doing research. It's developed over the last 20 years or so, and it's something that again, that we're still trying to overcome these critics who view these as not being as not mixing very well. Strengths are that, of course, when you are doing both of these strategies at once, you have the opportunity to complement the results of one or the other and strengthen what you're saying, and strengthen your understanding of what you're ultimately inferring based on what you found. It allows for testing of theories generated from grounded theory. So that's the idea that you generate a theory with a qualitative study and then go out and test it. A very strong researched program, in fact. You can address broader questions and problems. So you're not limited to, if you were primarily quantitative, the kinds of questions you can ask become very standardized and structured and limiting. And so if you expand yourself to be able to work in both worlds, all of a sudden you start to be able to dig a lot more deeply into the issues or the problem. And then you're adding insight and understanding that might be missed when only one method is used. So if we move over to Plano-Clark's definition, they dig into this idea of paradigms and philosophical assumptions. And so I like to sort of refer you to this, but also say that this is very complex. And so I think it's important once again to understand where people's criticisms are coming from, and Cresswell and Plano-Clark do a really good job of saying, okay, this is the different kinds of worldviews and paradigms that are at play here, and you can sort of understand why people might have a problem with the combination. So I'll post these slides. Here's their sort of overall definition of what mixed methods are. And it's a lot more detailed than what we saw with Johnson and Christensen. So the worldviews that are important to understand from a mixed methods approach is this idea of post-positivism, constructivism, advocacy and participatory, and then the pragmatic worldview. And post-positivism is a very much science-based approach. So this scientific theory testing approach, empirical observation and measurement. So that's the purely quantitative approach to research. Constructivism, on the other hand, is where you're in the world of primarily qualitative or phenomenological understanding of the way the world works. And this is where we view multiple perceptions of reality, perspectives of reality, and it's about theory building and meaning building and social construction of ideas. Then we move to advocacy and participatory, and again, this is much more focused in qualitative inquiry, and it's the idea that we're doing our research in order to change the way people think, to change the way we, as a society, as a socially networked society, understand and work within the world. Then we move to pragmatism, which is the idea that all three of these paradigms are at play, and depending on your research questions, depending on the problem, you need to be using the paradigm that makes the most sense. So according to Cresswell and Plano-Clark, there are three stances that emerge from these worldviews. The first stance is that there is one worldview for mixed methods, and that's the pragmatic stance. And I think this is the most dominant stance in the mixed methods world. And this is where the research question drives everything. Truth and reality are concepts that are abandoned, essentially. We don't mire ourselves in the idea that there's truth or there isn't truth, and we don't concern ourselves with the idea of how reality is constructed. We simply focus on answering our research questions. It's a very practical and applied research philosophy that guides our methodological decisions. Stance 2 is that researchers can use multiple paradigms or worldviews in their mixed methods study. And this requires that researchers must be very explicit in their use of paradigms. So as you move through the design phase, you're going to sort of very clearly explain where you're coming from. It's a dialectical perspective that can give rise to contradictions which are of value in and of themselves. And so, as I said before, just because contradictions emerge doesn't mean that that's a problem. It actually is a point of discussion and a point of pushing the boundaries of how we understand phenomena or theories or build our theories. And so the fact that you can have these different worldviews at play can be leveraged into interesting findings. So then finally, stance 3 is where your worldviews relate to the type of mixed methods design and may vary depending on the type of design. And so mixed methods are just a method, and researchers can employ any number of paradigms for its justification. So it's not necessarily about focusing on the contradictions that emerge, but it's allowing you the freedom to essentially move from one worldview to the next depending on the methodology that you employ. So we address different kinds of problems with mixed methods. The one that overlaps with Jonathan and Christensen is that when one approach is inadequate, we also just may need to enhance the study with a second source of data. We may be needing to explain our quantitative findings, or there may be a need to explore things first qualitatively. They talk about 4 types of designs, whereas the other researchers talk about the 9 types. They sort of have this framework that bases you in these 4 different basic types. And so there's the triangulation design, which is the purpose is to obtain different but complementary data on the same topic. The embedded design, which is when one data set provides a secondary or supportive role in the study. This can be 1 or 2 phase. And then there's the explanatory design. This is always a 2-phase design where qualitative data is used to explain or build on quantitative results. And then finally, there's the exploratory design, which is again a 2-phase design where qualitative data is collected first in order to explore the phenomena. They talk about the things that need to be considered when selecting a mixed method design. The timing decision, again, whether you're going to do this concurrently, which is at the same time, or sequentially. And then there's the weighting decision, which data is going to get more emphasis, which analysis is going to get more emphasis. And this can be based on worldviews. We talked about that with the stances. And then the mixing decision. So this is how can you merge these 2 things? Are they going to be embedded, connected? Are they going to be triangulated? Or are they going to be treated more uniquely? And that's basically it. This is your introduction to mixed methods, and I would say that it's very much just an introduction. If you are looking at doing this type of research going forward, and then take some additional classes to supplement what you've gotten here. But it should give you a pretty good understanding of the basis for mixed methods designs.